The knife slipped from my hand and clattered against the steel counter the moment I heard her laugh behind me. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. Nicole Bates had a laugh built to carry across a room, sharp and bright, the kind that made sure everyone noticed it. I picked the knife back up and kept slicing the pears in front of me, pretending I had not heard a thing. "Look at her," Nicole said to the man standing beside her. "They actually let her in the building. I thought this was supposed to be a serious kitchen." Callum Price laughed along with her, the sound thin and forced, like he was trying to prove he belonged in her circle more than he actually did. "Maybe she is here to taste test the desserts before we send them out," he said. "Save everyone the trouble of eating a whole slice." My hands did not stop moving. I had heard versions of this joke since I was 14 years old, standing in my aunt's bakery in a flour-dusted apron 2 sizes too big for me. I had heard it in culinary school, where a instructor once said, in front of the entire class, that pastry was a young woman's game, and I had already aged out of it at 23. I had heard it from strangers at farmers markets who ordered a slice of my lemon tart and then asked if I ate what I baked, like the two things could not both be true. I had built a wall around that kind of comment a long time ago. It still stung, it always would, but I had learned that the sting passed faster if I did not give it my face. The kitchen at Ashcombe Hall was larger than any space I had worked in before, all brushed steel and marble counters, with windows that looked out over a garden so trimmed and precise it looked painted on. I had been called in that morning for a trial shift, one of 3 candidates competing for a single position as head pastry chef for a private household. I did not know much about the man who owned the estate, only that his name was Damien Voss, that people spoke his name carefully, like it might bruise if handled wrong, and that the position paid more than double what I made at the small city bakery, where I had spent the last 6 years building a reputation nobody outside that neighborhood seemed to know about yet. "Careful," Nicole said, raising her voice just slightly more. "Don't want her to eat the pears before she gets to bake with them." A few of the kitchen staff near the ovens glanced over, then quickly looked away, the way people do when they see something happening that they do not want to be blamed for later. I kept my eyes on my cutting board. My chest was tight, but my hands were steady, because steady hands were the one thing nobody could take from me, no matter what they said about the rest of me. "That is enough," said a voice from the doorway. It was not loud, it did not need to be. The whole kitchen seemed to hear it anyway, and every single person in that room, myself included, turned toward the sound of it. A man stood in the entrance, tall, dressed in a dark gray suit with no tie, his hair combed back neatly, his face calm in a way that did not look calm at all once you noticed his eyes. He did not raise his voice a second time. He did not need to. Nicole's laugh died in her throat, and Callum's shoulders dropped an inch, like he was trying to make himself smaller. I had never seen a photograph of Damien Voss, but I knew, the second he walked in, exactly who he was. He did not look at Nicole or Callum for more than a second. His eyes moved to me instead, quick and unreadable, taking in my apron, my station, the pears I had been cutting into careful, even slices despite everything happening around me. I felt my pulse pick up under his gaze, not from fear exactly, but from the strange sensation of being truly looked at for the first time all morning, instead of looked past. "Continue," he said, to no one and everyone at once, and walked further into the kitchen. Nicole recovered first. She always did. She smoothed her apron and gave him a bright, practiced smile, the kind of smile that had probably opened doors for her most of her life. "Mr. Voss," she said, "we were just getting warmed up before the tasting. I have already prepared my chocolate work for you to sample whenever you are ready." "I heard what you were warming up," Damien said, without looking at her. His voice was even, almost pleasant, which somehow made it worse. "I have a very good memory for voices." Nicole's smile faltered for exactly a second, before she caught herself and rebuilt it. Callum suddenly became very interested in wiping down a counter that was already clean. Damien walked the length of the kitchen slowly, past the ovens, past the walk-in refrigerator, past the long marble counter where all 3 of our stations were set up side by side. He stopped at mine last. He looked at the pears, then at the small dish of poached fruit I had prepared earlier, sitting to the side, glazed and glistening under the kitchen lights. "What are you making?" he asked, not unkindly, not warmly either, just a simple question, asked like he actually wanted the answer. "A honey and thyme tart," I said, "with poached pear and a brown butter crust." "You poached the pears before you were told the tasting had started," he said. "I poached them the night before service," I said. "Cold poaching overnight lets the fruit hold its shape and take the flavor all the way through. If I do it fresh today, the texture will be soft on the outside and firm in the middle. It will look finished, but it will not taste finished." He studied me for a moment, and I could not read anything in his expression, which unsettled me more than if he had frowned or smiled. "You already knew you would be tested today," he said. "You prepared before you arrived." "I did not know what the test would be," I said, "but I know how to be ready." Something shifted behind his eyes, so brief I almost missed it. Then he moved on, walking to Callum's station, where a tray of small chocolate domes sat cooling under a heat lamp, and then to Nicole's station, where an elaborate sugar sculpture rose in careful, brittle curls above a plated dessert. I went back to my pears, my hands steady, my heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. I did not know yet what had just happened in that room, only that something had. The man who owned this house, whose name people said carefully, had looked at me the way no employer ever had, not like a body to judge, but like a mind worth understanding. Nicole caught my eye across the counter as Damien moved further away, and there was nothing friendly in her expression now. "Enjoy it while it lasts," she said quietly. "Just for me. Men like him do not keep people like you around for long. He will get bored of the novelty by lunch." I did not answer her. I focused on my crust instead, rolling it thin and even, folding the edges the way my aunt had taught me when I was too small to reach the counter without a stool. My hands remembered every lesson, even when my mind was somewhere else, tangled in worry about what the rest of the day would bring. Across the kitchen, Damien Voss stood near the window, speaking quietly to a man I did not recognize, someone in a dark suit who kept glancing toward our stations, then back at him, nodding at whatever was being said. I could not hear the words. I only caught the shape of them, low and clipped, the kind of conversation that happened in rooms where important decisions got made, without ever being announced out loud. Ruth, one of the kitchen assistants who had shown me around that morning, leaned toward me while pretending to check the temperature of my oven. "Watch yourself with those two," she whispered, tilting her head toward Nicole and Callum. "They have been trying to get the head position for months. They will not make it easy for you." "I noticed," I said. "He noticed too," Ruth said, glancing toward Damien. "That is the part they have not figured out yet." I did not know what to do with that information, so I set it aside and returned to my work, sliding the tart shell into the oven, setting the timer, wiping down my station with hands that only shook a little now. Somewhere behind me, Nicole was laughing again, that same bright, careful laugh, aimed at nobody and everybody, the kind of sound designed to fill a room and make sure she was never the one standing quietly in a corner. I had spent my whole life being underestimated in rooms exactly like this one. I had learned, slowly and expensively, that the people who laughed the loudest were rarely the ones who lasted. I did not know yet how the day would end, whether I would walk out of Ashcombe Hall with a job, or with nothing but the memory of being mocked in front of a man everyone feared. But I knew how to bake. I knew how to be steady when the room around me was not, and for the first time since I had walked through that door that morning, I let myself believe that might actually be enough. While the tart baked, I forced myself to look around the kitchen properly for the first time since I had arrived. It was the kind of space I had only ever imagined from photographs in trade magazines, the ones I used to flip through during slow afternoons at the bakery, dreaming about counters that did not wobble, and ovens that held an even heat without coaxing. There were 6 burners on the main range, a walk-in refrigerator, large enough to store a week of desserts for 100 guests, and a pastry station stocked with tools I recognized only because I had studied pictures of them online, never having held most of them in my own hands. It would have been easy to feel small in a room like that. I had felt small in smaller rooms for smaller reasons, but something about the size of the place made me feel steadier instead, like there was finally enough space for the work I actually wanted to do, instead of squeezing my ambition into a kitchen built for a fraction of what I could offer. Nicole's sugar sculpture cracked audibly a few feet away, and I heard her breath catch before she quickly reassembled her expression into something unbothered. Callum muttered something to her I could not make out, and she waved him off with a flick of her hand, already reaching for more sugar to fix the damage. I did not smile. I did not let myself. But some small, quiet part of me noted the crack anyway. The way you notice a crack forming in a wall, you have been told for years is stronger than you. Ruth passed behind me again, this time setting down a clean tray without being asked. A small kindness that did not need explaining. "He does not usually come down for trial shifts," she murmured, barely above a whisper. "The last 3, he sent his assistant instead. This is the first time he has come in person." "Why today?" I asked, keeping my voice just as low. "I do not know," she said, "but I would be careful what you assume it means. Good or bad." I nodded, understanding her caution, even as something in my chest refused to fully accept it. Whatever this was, whatever had brought Damien Voss into his own kitchen on a morning meant for tasting pastries, I intended to make sure the version of me he had seen so far was not the last impression I left behind. The timer chimed. I pulled the tart from the oven, the crust golden and firm at the edges, exactly the way it should be. The poached pears settled into the custard like they had always belonged there. I set it on the counter to cool, my hands finally steady all the way through, no tremor left in them at all. Across the kitchen, Damien Voss turned from the window and looked toward my station one more time, his expression unreadable, his eyes lingering just a moment longer than they needed to. Then he said something quiet to the man beside him, and the man nodded and stepped away, disappearing through the far door. I did not know what that meant either. I only knew that the tasting had not even started yet, and already, without a single dessert served, something in that kitchen had shifted, and none of us standing at those 3 stations were the same as we had been an hour before. The oven timer had gone silent, but the tension in the room had only just begun to build, ticking quietly towards something none of us could yet see coming. The man in the dark suit returned before I had even finished plating my tart, carrying a folder that he handed directly to Damien without a word. Damien opened it, scanned whatever was written inside, and closed it again, his face giving away nothing. "The tasting begins in 10 minutes, he announced to the room. "Each of you will present one finished dessert. I will decide today. There will be no second trial." Nicole's head snapped up from her sugar work. "Today," she repeated, like she had misheard him. "Today," Damien said, already turning away. I felt my stomach drop and lift at the same time. 10 minutes was not much time to finish plating, but I had built my entire tart around a design I had practiced a dozen times in my own kitchen at home, late at night, after closing the bakery, when nobody was watching and I could fail as many times as I needed to without an audience. I knew exactly what I needed to do. Callum, on the other hand, looked like a man who had just realized his chocolate domes had been cooling far too long under a heat lamp that was slightly too warm. He rushed to check them, his hands fumbling with the tray, and I heard a small hiss of frustration escape him when he saw the surface had gone slightly dull instead of glossy. I turned back to my own station, focused only on the shape of my hands and the plate in front of me. I drizzled a thin ribbon of honey across the base of the plate, set the tart slightly off-center the way I always did, and placed 3 candied thyme leaves along the edge, delicate enough to look like they had grown there naturally, rather than been placed with tweezers one at a time. That was when I noticed my sugar canister sitting slightly out of place. I always kept my station arranged a certain way, a habit built from years of working in small kitchens where a single misplaced item could mean losing 30 seconds you did not have during a busy service. The canister had been moved 2 inches to the left, and the lid was not quite seated the way I had left it. I did not touch it right away. I finished plating first, my hands moving on instinct while my mind worked through what I was seeing. Then, with the plate finished, I lifted the lid and dipped one finger in, tasting a small amount from the surface. Salt. Not sugar, salt. Poured carefully into the canister, mixed just enough at the top layer that a quick glance would have shown white crystals and nothing more. If I had used it in a last-minute adjustment, a light dusting over the tart to finish the presentation, the way I sometimes did for shine and texture, I would have ruined the dessert in front of the one person whose opinion mattered most that morning. I looked up. Nicole was watching me from her station, her expression carefully blank, but her eyes were not quite steady, and Callum would not look at me at all, which told me everything I needed to know about which one of them had done it, and which one of them had known. I did not say anything. Not yet. I set the canister aside, reached instead for the small jar of sugar I kept in my personal kit. tucked into my apron pocket out of habit. The same habit that had saved me more than once in kitchens where nothing could be trusted to stay where you left it. I finished the tart exactly the way I had planned, untouched by whatever they had tried to do. 2 minutes, Damien said from across the room, not looking up from whatever he was reading. I set my dessert on the presentation tray and stepped back from my station, my heart hammering harder than my hands would ever show. 2 feet away, Nicole's sugar sculpture stood in glassy, curling towers above her plated dessert, repaired from its earlier crack so cleanly that I doubted anyone but me had noticed it happen at all. Callum's chocolate domes had lost some of their shine, but he had dusted them with cocoa powder in a way that mostly hid the dullness, a clever save under pressure that I had to respect even as I did not particularly like him. Damien walked the length of the counter slowly, the same man from the dark suit trailing a step behind him with a small notebook in hand. He stopped first at Callum's station. "Tell me about this," Damien said. Callum straightened, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke about tempering technique and ganache ratios, describing a process that sounded rehearsed, the kind of answer memorized from a textbook rather than lived through in an actual kitchen. Damien listened without interrupting, then took a small bite from the edge of one dome, chewing slowly. "The shine is inconsistent," Damien said. "You held these under heat too long before service." "The lamp temperature was not properly calibrated," Callum said quickly. "I mentioned it to the staff earlier this morning." Ruth, standing near the ovens, opened her mouth like she wanted to correct that claim, then closed it again, clearly deciding it was not her place to contradict a candidate in front of the man who owned the house. "I noticed it anyway. I suspected Damien noticed it too." He moved to Nicole's station next. "And this," he said, gesturing at the towering sugarwork rising above her plate. Nicole launched into a description of her technique, with the same bright confidence she used for everything, explaining the isomalt she had used, the careful heat control required to pull sugar into these long, glass-like strands without shattering them. It was, I had to admit, genuinely skilled work. Whatever else I thought of her, she was talented, and pretending otherwise would have been its own kind of lie. "Where did you train?" Damien asked. 3 years at a culinary academy in the city, Nicole said, followed by an apprenticeship under a very well-regarded pastry chef, whose name I am sure you would recognize. "Which academy?" Damien asked. Nicole named one. Damien's expression did not change, but something in the quality of his silence did, a stillness that felt different from the stillness before. "That academy closed 4 years ago," he said. "I know, because I funded part of its final scholarship program before it shut down." The color left Nicole's face for exactly 1 second before she recovered, offering some explanation about attending before the closure, about the records being outdated, words that came fast and smooth but did not quite land the way her earlier confidence had. Damien did not press further. He simply made a small note in the notebook the man beside him was holding, and moved on to my station. He looked at my plate for a long moment before he said anything at all. The tart sat slightly off-center, the honey ribbon catching the light, the candied thyme leaves resting delicately at the edge, exactly where I had placed them. "Tell me about this," he said. "Honey and thyme tart with poached pear and a brown butter crust," I said. "The crust is chilled twice before baking to keep the butter from breaking down too early, which is what gives it the layered texture instead of a dense, heavy bite. The pears were poached the night before in a light syrup with thyme and a touch of black pepper, which keeps the sweetness from becoming one note. The honey is warmed just enough to thin it for drizzling, but not so much that it loses its flavor." Damien took a bite. He did not say anything right away, and the silence stretched long enough that I felt Nicole and Callum both watching, waiting to see what would happen. "There is salt in this," he said. My stomach dropped. "There should not be," I said carefully. "I did not season the finish with salt." "I did not say too much salt," Damien said. "I said there is salt. A very small amount, right at the back of the palate, after the honey. Was that intentional?" "Yes," I said, relief loosening something in my chest. "A pinch, dissolved into the poaching syrup, not on the surface. It sharpens the sweetness, instead of just adding more of it." Damien looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time since he had walked into that kitchen, something in his expression shifted into what almost looked like genuine interest. Your canister was tampered with, he said. It was not a question. I hesitated only a second before answering honestly. Yes. And you did not use it? No, I said. I keep a personal kit. I have learned not to trust a shared station completely, in kitchens where more than one person is competing for the same thing. Damien turned, slowly, to look at Nicole and Callum, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees without anyone touching the thermostat at all. Nicole's confident expression finally cracked, just slightly, at the edges. I did not touch her station, she said quickly. I do not know what she is talking about. I did not accuse anyone, Damien said quietly. Yet. The word hung in the air between all of us, heavy and precise, and I realized in that moment that whatever I had walked into that morning, it was no longer simply a competition for a job. It had become something else entirely, and none of us standing in that kitchen were prepared for where it was about to go. Damien did not press the matter further right away. Instead, he set my plate down carefully, wiped his fork with the linen napkin the assistant offered him, and turned toward the window, his hands clasped behind his back, the way a man stands when he is thinking through several problems at once and does not want his face to give away which one he is solving first. When I was young, he said, not quite to any of us in particular, my grandmother ran a small kitchen behind our house. She fed the whole street some winters, when there was nothing else to eat, and everyone pretended it was normal to share a single pot of soup between 4 families. She used to say that a kitchen tells you everything about the people working in it, faster than any conversation ever could. I did not understand what she meant until I was much older. Nobody spoke. Even Nicole, who I suspected rarely allowed a silence to sit unfilled for long, seemed to understand that this was not a moment for her voice. A kitchen under pressure, Damien continued, shows you who reaches for a shortcut and who reaches for a solution. It shows you who protects their own work and who tries to make sure nobody else succeeds either. He turned back to face us. I did not come down here today because I doubted the resumes in that folder. I came down because resumes tell me nothing useful. This does. I felt Ruth watching from near the ovens, her arms folded, her expression carefully neutral, though I thought I caught the faintest suggestion of a smile at the corner of her mouth, quickly hidden. Callum shifted his weight, glancing sideways at Nicole, some silent calculation passing between them that I could not fully read. Mr. Voss, he said, his voice steadier now, though I could hear the strain underneath it. I would like to formally state that I had no involvement in anything that happened at her station. I did not ask you to state anything, Damien said, but thank you for volunteering the information before I requested it. A faint, almost imperceptible ripple moved through the kitchen staff at that, the kind of shared understanding that passes silently between people who have all just watched someone make a mistake in real time. Damien looked at his assistant, who had remained quiet throughout the entire exchange, his notebook held ready, but mostly unused. Pull the footage from this morning, Damien said. Every angle covering the pastry stations. I had not even noticed the small cameras mounted discreetly near the ceiling until that moment, tucked into the corners where the walls met the crown molding, nearly invisible unless you already knew to look for them. Of course a house like this would have them. Of course a man like Damien Voss would never leave a room unwatched, especially not a kitchen filled with knives, fire, and 3 strangers competing for a single position inside his home. Nicole's composure finally slipped all the way through. That is not necessary, she said, too quickly. I am sure whatever happened was simply an accident. Kitchens are chaotic. Things get moved around constantly. I agree, Damien said. Kitchens are chaotic, which is precisely why I do not rely on memory or accusation to determine what happened in one. I rely on evidence. He said it simply, without any particular heat behind the words, which somehow made them land harder than if he had shouted. I found myself standing very still, watching this quiet, careful man dismantle the room without raising his voice even once, and understanding, for the first time, exactly why people spoke his name the way they did. The assistant murmured something into a small device at his wrist, and within a minute, another member of the household staff appeared carrying a tablet, which he handed directly to Damien. Damien did not look at it immediately. He set it face down on the counter beside my plate, as though he already knew what it would show, and wanted to give the room one final chance to be honest, before he confirmed it. Does anyone wish to revise their earlier statement? He asked, looking directly at Nicole and then at Callum, giving each of them several long seconds of silence in which to speak. Neither of them said a word. Very well, Damien said, and reached for the tablet. The screen lit up in Damien's hand, and the entire kitchen seemed to hold its breath at once. He turned the tablet so that only he and his assistant could see it at first, his eyes scanning across the footage with the same unreadable calm he had shown all morning. Nobody moved. Even the low hum of the oven seemed quieter somehow, like the whole room had been asked to listen for something none of us could hear. Interesting, Damien said, after a long moment. He turned the tablet around so the rest of us could see the screen. The video showed a wide angle of the kitchen from 20 minutes earlier, time-stamped in the corner, clear enough that there was no mistaking what it showed. Nicole stood at my station, her back partially turned to the camera, her hand dipping into a small pouch at her waist, before tipping something pale and fine into my sugar canister. She stirred it gently with one finger, careful not to disturb the surface too much, then walked away as though nothing had happened at all. The footage ran for perhaps 8 seconds. It felt much longer. Nicole's face had gone pale, all her earlier brightness drained out of it entirely. That is not what it looks like, she said, though even she seemed to hear how hollow the words sounded the moment they left her mouth. Then tell me what it looks like, Damien said, setting the tablet down on the counter, facing up now, the frozen image of her hand still visible on the screen for everyone to study. Because from where I am standing, it looks like sabotage, and I have very little patience for people who cannot win honestly. I only wanted a fair chance, Nicole said, her voice rising, the careful polish she had worn all morning cracking apart piece by piece. You have no idea what it is like, watching someone walk in off the street with half the training I have, half the experience, and still somehow, half the honesty, Damien interrupted, quiet and precise. That is the word you are looking for, though I understand why you would rather avoid it. Nicole opened her mouth again, then closed it, seeming to realize there was no version of this conversation that ended in her favor. Damien turned to Callum next, who had gone very still, his eyes fixed somewhere on the floor. And you, Damien said, you watched this happen. I did not touch anything, Callum said quickly. I did not ask whether you touched anything, Damien said. I asked whether you watched it happen. The footage will tell me either way, so I would encourage you to answer honestly, while you still have the chance to. The silence stretched long enough that I found myself almost feeling sympathy for Callum, watching him search for some version of the truth that would not cost him everything. In the end, he simply nodded, once, a small motion that admitted more than any words could have. I did not think she would actually go through with it, he said quietly. I told her it was a bad idea. But you said nothing when it happened, Damien said. You let another person's work be sabotaged in front of you, and you said nothing, because you believed her actions might benefit you as well. Callum did not answer that. There was nothing left to say that would not make things worse. Damien straightened, and something in the air of the kitchen shifted, the way weather shifts before a storm finally breaks. He did not shout, he did not raise his hand or his voice, or make any gesture that could be mistaken for violence, and I understood, watching him, that he did not need to. The stillness in his voice was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. I built this house, Damien said, on the understanding that the people inside it can be trusted to act with integrity, whether or not anyone is watching. I do not care how talented someone is with sugar or chocolate, if I cannot trust what they do the moment my back is turned. Talent without integrity is simply a more elegant way to fail me. He looked at Nicole first. You have real skill. I will not pretend otherwise. Your sugar work is genuinely impressive, and under different circumstances, I would have been glad to have you in this kitchen. He paused, but you built a career on borrowed credentials from a school that has not existed in 4 years, and you tried to sabotage a colleague rather than compete with her honestly. I do not employ people I cannot trust with a locked door, let alone an open kitchen. Please, Nicole started, but Damien was already continuing, his voice unbothered by the interruption. You have 60 seconds to gather your belongings, he said. My staff will escort you to the gate. I would not recommend attempting to contact this household again, in any capacity, for any reason. The words landed like something physical, and I watched Nicole's face go through several stages at once: disbelief, anger, something close to panic, before finally settling into a kind of brittle resignation. She looked, for just a moment, like she might argue further. Then she seemed to remember the footage still glowing on the tablet, the proof sitting there undeniable, and whatever fight she had left in her seemed to drain away all at once. "This is ridiculous," she said instead, grabbing her bag from beneath the counter, her hands shaking slightly as she gathered her things. "You are going to regret this. She does not have half the training I do. She will not last a month in a kitchen like this." "That will be my concern to manage," Damien said. "Not yours." Nicole turned toward me before she left, and for a moment, I thought she might say something cruel, one final comment aimed at the parts of me she had spent the morning mocking. Instead, she simply looked at me, something unreadable passing behind her eyes, and walked out without another word. Two members of the household staff fell into step behind her, escorting her toward the far door, their presence quiet but unmistakably firm. Callum did not wait to be told twice. He gathered his things quickly, his eyes down, and followed toward the same door, though he paused just before reaching it. "For what it is worth," he said, glancing back at me, "the salt was not my idea. I am sorry I did not say anything sooner." I did not answer him. I was not sure yet what I felt, watching two people lose everything they had walked in with that morning, even people who had spent the last hour trying to make me feel small. There was no satisfaction in it, not the way I might have expected. Only a strange, hollow quiet, and the sense that something significant had shifted in the room, something that had nothing to do with pastry at all. The door closed behind them, and the kitchen fell into a silence unlike any that had come before it, heavier somehow, filled with the absence of two people who had occupied so much space in the room only minutes earlier. Damien exhaled slowly, the first sign I had seen all morning that any of this had cost him something, even a man as composed as he clearly worked hard to be. He turned to the remaining staff scattered around the kitchen, watching with expressions that ranged from shock to poorly hidden relief. "Back to work," he said, and the kitchen slowly came back to life around us, the low hum of ovens resuming, someone quietly restocking a shelf near the pantry, the ordinary rhythm of a working kitchen, trying to reassert itself after something had briefly torn through it. Ruth appeared at my side, setting a clean towel down beside my station without a word, though her eyes flicked toward me with something like quiet approval. I nodded my thanks, still trying to steady my own breathing, still processing everything that had just unfolded in less than 5 minutes. Damien walked back toward my station, and for the first time since he had entered the kitchen that morning, his expression had softened into something that was not quite a smile, but was no longer entirely guarded either. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice quieter now, meant only for me. "You should not have had to endure what you endured this morning, in my house, under my roof. That reflects poorly on me, not on you." "You did not do it," I said. "You are not responsible for what they said." "I am responsible for the kitchen I run," he said. "And for far too long today, I let it become something ugly before I stepped in to correct it. That is a mistake I do not intend to repeat." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing at all, simply looking at him, this quiet, careful man who had walked into a room and dismantled two people's cruelty in under a minute, without ever raising his voice. "Your tart was the best thing I have tasted in this kitchen in longer than I care to admit," he said. "The salt in the syrup was a clever choice. Most people would not have thought to sharpen sweetness that way." "Thank you," I said, and meant it, feeling something loosen in my chest that had been tight since the moment I had walked through the front gate that morning. "We are not finished discussing today," Damien said, glancing toward the door his assistant had disappeared through earlier. "But I think you have more than earned a moment to breathe before we continue. Take 15 minutes. There is tea in the sitting room down the hall, and nobody will disturb you there." I nodded, my legs feeling strangely unsteady beneath me, now that the adrenaline of the last hour was finally beginning to fade. As I walked toward the door he had indicated, I glanced back once, and found him still watching me, his expression thoughtful, unreadable in a different way than it had been that morning, as though he was turning over some decision in his mind that had not yet been finished. I walked down the hallway slowly, my hand trailing along the cool wall as I went, letting the quiet of the house settle over me like something I could finally lean against. The sitting room Damien had mentioned was smaller than I expected, tucked behind a set of tall doors near the end of the corridor, with a single window overlooking the same trimmed garden I had glimpsed from the kitchen earlier that morning. A pot of tea sat waiting on a low table, steam still curling gently from its spout, as though someone had known exactly when I would arrive. I sat down carefully, my hands finally beginning to shake now that there was nobody left to see them do it. I had spent the last hour holding myself together through sheer will, refusing to let Nicole's voice or Callum's laughter reach the parts of me that still remembered every cruel comment from every kitchen I had ever worked in. Now, alone in the quiet, I let myself feel all of it at once, the fear, the humiliation, and underneath it, something unexpected and harder to name, a small, stubborn flicker of pride. I thought about my aunt, standing behind the counter of that first small bakery, flour dusted across her apron, telling me once that the people who mocked you loudest were usually the ones most afraid of being outworked. I had not understood what she meant back then. I understood it a little better now, sitting in a stranger's sitting room, my hands wrapped around a teacup that probably cost more than a week of my old rent. Ruth appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, carrying a small plate of shortbread she set down beside the tea without being asked. "You did well," she said quietly. "Better than well." "I do not know what just happened out there," I admitted. "One minute, I was being mocked, and the next, 2 people were escorted out of the building because of me." "Not because of you," Ruth said, settling into the chair across from me. "Because of what they did. There is a difference, even if it does not feel that way right now." I turned the teacup slowly in my hands, watching the steam rise and curl before disappearing into the air. "Does this happen often?" I asked. "People being let go like that?" Ruth considered the question for a moment before answering. "Mr. Voss does not tolerate dishonesty," she said carefully. "Not from staff, not from business associates, not from anyone under his roof. He has built everything he has on being able to trust the people around him completely. When that trust is broken, he does not hesitate. But I have worked here for 6 years, and I have never seen him step into a trial shift personally before today." "Why today then?" I asked, echoing the same question I had asked her earlier that morning. Ruth studied me for a long moment, something thoughtful passing behind her eyes. "I could not say for certain," she said, "but I have known him a long time, and I have never seen him watch someone the way he watched you this morning, particularly not before they had proven anything to him at all." I did not know what to do with that observation, so I simply nodded and sipped my tea, letting the warmth settle something in my chest that had been unsteady since the moment I had walked through the gate that morning. "For what it is worth," Ruth added, rising from her chair, "I hope you take the position, if he offers it. This kitchen could use someone who bakes the way you do. It has needed it for a long time." She left the room quietly, and I sat alone for a few more minutes, finishing my tea, watching the garden outside the window sway gently in a breeze I could not feel through the glass. Somewhere down the hallway, I could hear the faint sounds of the kitchen resuming its normal rhythm, pans clattering, someone calling out an order, the ordinary noise of a working household that had briefly been interrupted by something much larger than pastry. I thought about Nicole's parting words as she had gathered her things, the venom underneath them, even as her voice had trembled. "She does not have half the training I do. She will not last a month in a kitchen like this." I did not know if that was true. I had built my entire career on being underestimated, on proving, over and over, in kitchen after kitchen, that the shape of my body had nothing to do with the skill in my hands. I did not know if this house would be any different from the others. But something about the way Damien Voss had looked at my tart, had asked about the salt in the syrup with genuine curiosity, instead of suspicion, made me believe, for the first time in longer than I could remember, that maybe it would be. A soft knock sounded at the door, and I looked up to find Damien himself standing in the frame, his jacket now removed, his sleeves rolled to the forearm in a way that made him look, for just a moment, less like the man whose name people spoke carefully, and more like someone who had simply spent the morning working hard in his own kitchen. "May I join you?" he asked, gesturing toward the empty chair across from mine. "Of course," I said, setting my teacup down, my pulse quickening again. though this time for reasons that had very little to do with fear. He sat down slowly, folding his hands in his lap, studying me for a long moment before speaking. "I imagine this was not the morning you expected when you arrived here today," he said. "No," I admitted. "It was not. For that, I am sorry," he said. "But I would like to discuss something with you now, if you are willing, before the rest of the day pulls either of us in a different direction." I nodded, setting aside the tea, giving him my full attention, understanding somehow that whatever he was about to say would matter far more than anything that had happened in that kitchen so far. Whatever conversation was still waiting for me in that quiet sitting room, I understood, somehow, that it would change far more than just the outcome of a job interview. Something in the way he looked at me told me the morning had shifted something for him as well, though I could not yet begin to guess exactly what. "I would like to offer you the position of head pastry chef for this household," Damien said, without any preamble at all, the words landing plainly in the quiet room between us. I had expected many things walking into that sitting room, but not quite this, not so quickly, not with so little ceremony attached to it. "You have not seen my full portfolio," I said, before I could stop myself. "You have only tasted one dessert. I have tasted a dessert made under sabotage, prepared by someone who kept enough composure to notice the tampering, correct it silently, and still produce something better than either of the people trying to undermine her," Damien said. "That tells me a great deal more than a portfolio ever could." I sat with that for a moment, turning the words over carefully, searching them for the catch I half expected to find hidden somewhere inside. "The salary posted for the position," I said slowly, "was already more than double what I currently make. I would like to ask for slightly more than that, given everything that happened this morning, and given what I would be bringing to this house." Something flickered across Damien's face, not offense, but something closer to genuine interest, like I had surprised him in a way he had not quite anticipated. "Name a figure," he said. I named one, higher than I had originally planned to ask for before the morning had unfolded the way it had, my voice steady, even as my heart pounded harder than I wanted to admit. I expected him to negotiate, or at least to pause and consider it. Instead, he simply nodded. "Done," he said. "I will have the contract drafted by this afternoon." I blinked, caught off guard by how easily he had agreed, and something uneasy stirred beneath my relief. "That was faster than I expected," I said carefully. "I would like to understand why." Damien leaned back slightly in his chair, studying me with the same unreadable patience he had shown all morning. "You are wondering whether this is pity," he said. "Whether I am offering you this position and this salary because of what happened with Nicole and Callum, rather than because of what you can actually do in a kitchen." "Yes," I admitted, relieved that he had said it plainly, instead of forcing me to circle around the question. "I do not want charity. I have spent my whole career proving that I do not need it, and I am not interested in a position that exists only to make you feel better about what happened in your own kitchen this morning." Something in his expression shifted then, a kind of quiet respect settling into it that had not quite been there before. "That is a fair question," he said, "and you deserve an honest answer." He paused, choosing his words carefully. I did not become the kind of man people speak about carefully by making decisions out of sympathy. I do not have room in my life for decisions that are not, at their core, practical. Sympathy is a luxury I gave up a long time ago, for reasons that are not relevant to this conversation. "Then why?" I asked. "Because your tart was extraordinary," he said simply. "Because you noticed sabotage under pressure, and adjusted without losing your composure or your timing. Because when I asked you about the salt, you answered with precision instead of panic, the way someone answers when they actually understand their craft rather than simply performing it. I have interviewed a great many pastry chefs over the years. Very few of them have made me want a second bite before I had finished the first." I did not know how to respond to that, so I simply sat with it for a moment, letting it settle somewhere honest inside me, instead of dismissing it out of habit, the way I usually dismissed compliments about my work, half expecting them to be followed by some comment about my body instead. "I have been underestimated in almost every kitchen I have ever worked in," I said finally, the words coming out more openly than I had intended. "People see a certain shape, a certain size, and they decide what that means about my skill before I have even picked up a knife. I have spent years proving them wrong, one dessert at a time, and it never stops being exhausting. I imagine it does not, Damien said, his voice quieter now. For what it is worth, I did not see any of that when I walked into my kitchen this morning. I saw someone slicing pears with more precision than anyone else in the room, while two people who considered themselves her superiors wasted their energy trying to make her feel small instead of focusing on their own work. That told me everything I needed to know about which of you actually belonged there. Something in my chest loosened at that, a tension I had carried for so long I had almost stopped noticing its weight. "Thank you," I said quietly. "You do not need to thank me for stating a fact," he said. "But you are welcome, regardless." We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the tea between us long gone cold, the garden outside the window shifting gently in a breeze that finally seemed to reach the glass. I studied him carefully, this man whose name people spoke with caution, who ran his household with a quiet, unshakable authority that had dismantled two people's cruelty without ever raising his voice, and found myself wondering what else lived beneath that composed exterior. What history had shaped a man into someone who trusted evidence over accusation and precision over sympathy? "May I ask you something?" I said. "You may ask," Damien said. "I reserve the right not to answer." "That seems fair," I said. "People speak your name very carefully. I noticed it from the moment I arrived this morning, in the way the staff moved around you, in the way Nicole and Callum both changed the moment you walked into the room. I would like to understand what that means if I am going to be working in this house." Damien was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the window, and I wondered if I had overstepped, if I had asked the one question that would undo whatever fragile trust had been built between us over the last hour. "I run several businesses," he said finally, choosing each word with obvious care. "Some of them are more delicate than others, in ways I am not able to discuss in detail with someone I have known for less than a day. What I can tell you is that the people who work in this house, in whatever capacity, are protected as long as they are honest with me. I do not ask my staff to involve themselves in matters that do not concern them, and in exchange, I expect the same discretion and loyalty I offer them. Beyond that, I would ask that you allow me some time before I share more." I nodded slowly, understanding that this was likely as much honesty as he was prepared to offer someone he had only met that morning, and finding, somewhat to my own surprise, that I was willing to accept that boundary for now. "That is fair," I said again. "Thank you," he said, and something in his voice suggested he had expected pushback and was quietly relieved not to receive it. "I do have one condition of my own," I said, "before I accept the position." Damien raised an eyebrow slightly, the first genuinely curious expression I had seen cross his face all morning. "Name it." "I run my kitchen my way," I said. "I choose my own staff, within reason. I do not want another morning like this one, where I am left defending myself against sabotage in front of the person deciding whether I keep my position. If I am going to build something here, I need to trust that the space I am working in is actually mine to run." Damien considered this for a long moment, then nodded once, decisively. "Agreed," he said. "The kitchen will be yours, in every sense that matters. I will make that clear to the rest of the household staff before the day is finished." "Then I accept," I said, and felt something settle inside me as I said it, a decision made not out of desperation or gratitude, but out of something closer to genuine belief, for the first time in longer than I could remember, that I had found a place where my work might finally be seen clearly, without the noise that usually surrounded it. Damien rose from his chair, extending his hand toward me, and I stood to take it, his grip firm but careful, the handshake of a man who understood exactly how much weight a simple gesture could carry. "Welcome to Ashcombe Hall," he said. "I look forward to seeing what you build here." "So do I said, and meant it more than I had expected to, standing there in that quiet sitting room, the morning's chaos finally settling into something that felt, against all my earlier fears, like the beginning of something worth having. As he turned to leave the room, he paused at the doorway, glancing back at me with an expression I could not quite name, something warmer than professional courtesy, though neither of us said anything more about it in that moment. "One more thing," he said, "that tart. I would like it added to the permanent menu here, if you are willing." "I would be honored," I said, and watched him nod once before disappearing down the hallway, leaving me alone in the quiet room, with the last of the cold tea, and the unmistakable feeling that my life had just shifted onto a path I had never expected to find myself walking. I sat back down slowly, letting the silence of the room settle around me, and found myself replaying the last hour in my mind, trying to understand exactly how the morning had turned so completely from what I had expected when I first walked through the gate. I had come to Ashcombe Hall braced for judgment, prepared for the kind of dismissive glances I had grown used to receiving in kitchens far smaller than this one. Instead, I was leaving that sitting room with a position I had not dared to hope for, a salary that would change the shape of my entire life, and a strange, unfamiliar sense that someone had finally looked past the surface of me and found something worth taking seriously underneath. Ruth appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, a knowing look already settled on her face before I had said a single word. "I take it congratulations are in order," she said. "How did you know?" I asked, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. "He does not usually stay in a room this long after a trial shift," Ruth said, stepping inside and gathering the empty teacups onto a small tray. "And he certainly does not usually walk out of one looking like that." "Like what?" I asked. Ruth considered the question for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Like a man who has just made a decision he is glad about," she said. "I have worked in this house a long time. I do not think I have seen that particular expression on him before." I did not know what to do with that observation, so I simply thanked her and let the comment settle somewhere quiet in the back of my mind, unwilling yet to examine it too closely. There was too much else to think about, too much that had happened in a single morning for me to fully process any single piece of it at once. "When do you start?" Ruth asked, setting the tray aside. "Tomorrow, I believe," I said, though the details had not been fully settled yet. "He mentioned drafting the contract this afternoon." "Good," Ruth said, a genuine warmth entering her voice for the first time since I had met her that morning. "This kitchen has needed someone like you for a long time. I mean that." I thanked her again, and she left to return to her duties, leaving me alone with my thoughts for a few more minutes, before I gathered my own bag and made my way back toward the kitchen to collect my things. The room looked different now than it had that morning, quieter, calmer. The tension that had filled it for the better part of an hour finally dissipated into something closer to ordinary rhythm. A few of the staff glanced up as I passed, offering small nods or quiet smiles that had not been there when I first arrived, and I understood, walking through that space, that something fundamental had shifted, not just in my own circumstances, but in the way this kitchen would operate going forward. I packed my knives carefully into their case, wrapped my personal jar of sugar back into my apron pocket out of habit, and took one last look around the space that would soon belong to me, in a way I had not expected when I woke up that morning. The marble counters gleamed under the afternoon light, streaming through the tall windows. The oven sat quiet and waiting, and for the first time since I had arrived, I allowed myself to imagine what this kitchen might look like, filled entirely with my own work, my own recipes, my own vision, instead of borrowed space I had to fight for a place within. As I walked toward the door, I passed the small mounted camera near the crown molding that had captured everything that morning, and found myself glancing up at it with something close to gratitude, an odd feeling to hold toward a piece of equipment, but an honest one nonetheless. Without it, I might have walked out of this house with nothing more than the memory of being mocked, no proof, no vindication. Only the same tired, familiar story I had lived through so many times before, in so many other kitchens. Instead, I was walking out with a position, a contract on its way, and the strange, unfamiliar sensation of having been truly seen for the first time in longer than I could remember, not for the shape of my body, but for the steadiness of my hands and the precision of my work. I did not yet know what the coming weeks would bring, what it would mean to run a kitchen inside a house belonging to a man whose name people spoke so carefully, or what unspoken tension had passed between us in that quiet sitting room, something that felt larger than professional respect, though neither of us had named it aloud. But I knew, walking out through the gate that afternoon with my knife case in hand, that whatever came next, I was finally walking towards something, instead of simply surviving what had come before. 6 weeks into running the kitchen at Ashcombe Hall, I stood at the same marble counter where I had once been mocked, and watched an entirely different scene unfold in front of me. Oliver, one of the two new assistants I had hired myself, was carefully folding egg whites into a chocolate batter, his movements still a little too rushed, though improving daily under my correction. Gareth, the other, stood at the far station, tempering a batch of caramel, with the kind of focus that told me he had finally stopped flinching every time I walked past to check his work. It had taken the first 2 weeks for the staff to understand that I did not run my kitchen the way the previous head chef had, that I did not believe in silent intimidation, only clear expectations and honest feedback, delivered without cruelty, but also without excuses. "Careful with the heat on that caramel," I called across the kitchen. "You want it just past amber, not a shade further." "Understood, chef," Gareth said, adjusting the flame immediately. I allowed myself a small measure of satisfaction at that, small enough not to distract from the dozen tasks still waiting for my attention, but real nonetheless. In 6 weeks, I had rebuilt the pastry program at Ashcombe Hall almost entirely from scratch, replacing half the standing menu with recipes I had spent years perfecting in smaller kitchens that had never given me the resources to fully realize them. Damien had kept his word from that first afternoon. The kitchen was mine, in every sense that mattered, and the staff who worked in it now answered to me alone. Ruth appeared in the doorway, a folder tucked under one arm, her expression carrying the particular blend of caution and amusement I had come to recognize over the past few weeks. Whenever she was about to deliver news she suspected I would not entirely welcome. "There is someone at the gate asking for you," she said. "Says her name is Nicole Bates." My hands stilled over the dough I had been shaping, a slow, cold recognition settling through me before I even fully processed the words. "What does she want?" I asked. "She would not say," Ruth said. "Only that it was important, and that she needed to speak with you directly." I set the dough aside carefully, wiping my hands on the towel hanging from my apron, my mind already working through the possibilities. It had been 6 weeks since Nicole had been escorted from this kitchen, with her belongings gathered hastily in her arms. 6 weeks in which I had heard nothing from her at all, aside from a few uncomfortable rumors passed along through mutual acquaintances in the wider culinary community, none of which painted a particularly flattering picture of where her career had gone since. "Tell her I will meet her in the front hall," I said finally, "not the kitchen." Ruth nodded and disappeared, and I took a moment to steady myself before following, unsure exactly what I would find waiting for me, or what Nicole might want after all this time. She looked different when I found her standing in the front hall, thinner somehow, though not in a way that suggested health, her clothes slightly less polished than the sharp, confident outfits she had worn during her trial shift all those weeks ago. She straightened when she saw me, some old habit of composure trying to reassert itself, though I could see, even from a distance, that it was costing her more effort than it once had. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. "What do you need?" I asked, keeping my tone even, neither warm nor cold, simply direct. Nicole hesitated, glancing around the front hall as though checking for anyone who might overhear. "I have been trying to find work since I left here," she said. "It has not gone well. Word travels fast in this industry, and apparently the footage from that morning traveled with it, in ways I did not expect." I said nothing, waiting for her to continue, unwilling to fill the silence for her, the way I had once filled silences to avoid conflict in kitchens, where speaking up had cost me more than it was worth. "I went to a family friend a few days ago," Nicole continued, her voice tightening slightly. "Someone connected to a rival household, competitors of Mr. Voss in certain business matters I do not fully understand. I mentioned what happened here, thinking it might help me find a position with them instead. I did not realize, until it was already done, that they intended to use what I told them as leverage against this house, twisting the story to make it sound like negligence. Like Mr. Voss ran an unsafe kitchen that let sabotage happen under his own roof. A cold unease settled into my stomach at that. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because they are planning to use it publicly," Nicole said. "Some kind of statement to embarrass him, weaken his standing with certain people he does business with." I did not fully understand what I had walked into until they explained what they wanted from me, and by then, I felt trapped into continuing. She paused, something that looked almost like genuine shame crossing her face. I came here because whatever I think of what happened between us, I did not want to be responsible for causing something worse. I did not think you deserved to be caught in the middle of it either. I studied her for a long moment, uncertain how much of this to believe, uncertain whether this was true remorse, or simply Nicole recognizing, too late, that she had aligned herself with people more dangerous than she had anticipated. But something in her posture, in the particular exhaustion behind her eyes, told me this was not a performance. I need to speak with Mr. Voss about this, I said finally. Wait here. Before going to find him, I paused for a moment in the corridor, steadying myself, thinking back over the 6 weeks that had passed since my first morning in that kitchen. So much had changed in that short span of time. I had rebuilt the pastry program from nothing, hired staff who trusted my judgment instead of questioning my presence in the room, and slowly, carefully, built something resembling a genuine friendship with Damien himself, one that had started with careful professional distance and had, without either of us naming it directly, grown into something warmer. We had shared quiet dinners after long service nights, conversations that stretched well past the topics of menus and budgets, moments where he had let his guarded composure slip just enough to show me glimpses of the man beneath the name people spoke so carefully. I had come to understand, gradually, that his caution was not cruelty. Only the accumulated weight of a life that had taught him trust was expensive and rarely repaid in kind. Standing in that corridor now, carrying news that could threaten everything he had built, I felt the full weight of how much I had come to care about protecting it, and him, in return. I found Damien in his study down the east corridor, a room I had visited only a handful of times since starting my position, always for brief, practical conversations about the household budget or upcoming events requiring special menus. He looked up from whatever he had been reading when I entered, something in my expression apparently enough to tell him this was not a conversation about pastry. Nicole Bates is here, I said. She says a rival household is planning to use the story of what happened in the kitchen against you, twisting it into something about negligence. She claims she did not realize what she was walking into until it was too late. Damien's expression did not change much, though something behind his eyes sharpened noticeably. The same quiet intensity I had seen the morning he dismantled Nicole and Callum's cruelty, without ever raising his voice. Which household? He asked. She did not say a name, I said, only that they are competitors of yours, in matters she did not fully understand. Damien was quiet for a moment, considering this, his fingers steepled together in front of him. This does not surprise me as much as it perhaps should, he said finally. There are people in my line of work who look for any opportunity to weaken a rival's standing, and a story about disloyalty inside my own household would be a convenient tool for exactly that purpose. What will you do? I asked. Bring her to me, Damien said. I would like to hear this directly, before I decide how to respond. I returned to the front hall and led Nicole back through the corridor, watching her grow visibly more nervous the closer we got to Damien's study, until she stood finally in the doorway, her earlier composure almost entirely gone. Sit, Damien said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk, and Nicole obeyed without argument, something I doubted she would have done 6 weeks earlier, before this house had taught her exactly how consequences worked within its walls. She repeated the story she had told me, in more detail this time, naming the household that had approached her, describing the specific claims they intended to make public, and the timeline they had given her for providing additional information to strengthen their case. Damien listened without interrupting, his expression giving away nothing, though I noticed his fingers had gone still against the desk, a small tell I had learned to recognize over the past 6 weeks, as a sign of careful, focused attention. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. You understand, he said, that what you did in coming here today does not undo what you did 6 weeks ago. I do not forget sabotage, and I do not forget the reasons you were removed from this house. I understand, Nicole said quietly, but I also understand the difference between someone who causes harm carelessly and someone who continues causing it deliberately, long after the original opportunity has passed, Damien continued. You did not have to come here today. You could have continued down the path you were already on, and I would likely not have learned of it until the damage was already done. The fact that you chose otherwise tells me something worth considering. Nicole did not say anything, seeming unsure whether hope was a safe thing to feel in that particular moment. "I will handle the matter with the household in question," Damien said. "That is not something either of you need to concern yourselves with further. As for you," he continued, looking at Nicole, "I will not offer you a position in this house. That trust was broken once, and I do not rebuild it easily. But I know of a smaller kitchen in the city that is currently searching for a pastry assistant, one that would not require the reputation you no longer have in circles like mine. I will make a call on your behalf, nothing more." Nicole's eyes widened slightly, clearly having expected something far harsher than this quiet, measured mercy. "Thank you," she said, her voice unsteady. "Do not thank me yet," Damien said. "Prove that this was worth the effort, and perhaps in time, thanks will be appropriate. For now, simply do better than you did here." Nicole left the study a few minutes later, escorted out by the same staff member who had walked her out 6 weeks earlier, though this time the atmosphere carried none of the sharp tension it once had. I lingered in the doorway after she left, watching Damien return his attention to the papers on his desk, a quiet stillness settling over the room now that the conversation had concluded. "You did not have to be that generous with her," I said. "No," Damien agreed. "I did not, but I have found over the years that mercy, offered carefully, is often a more effective tool than punishment offered endlessly. She will remember this conversation far longer than she would have remembered simple cruelty, and it costs me very little to make a single phone call." I studied him for a moment, this careful, complicated man who ran his household with quiet authority and had somehow, over the last 6 weeks, become someone I looked forward to seeing each day, in ways that had very little to do with pastry contracts or kitchen budgets. That evening, after the kitchen had finally quieted and the last of the staff had gone home, I found myself preparing a small dessert I had not put on the official menu, a simple tart layered with dark chocolate and a thin, bright ribbon of orange, finished with a single delicate curl of candied peel. I plated it carefully, the way I had plated that very first tart 6 weeks earlier, and carried it down the same hallway toward the small sitting room where this entire story had first properly begun between us. Damien was waiting there when I arrived, as though he had somehow known I would come, a fresh pot of tea already steaming gently on the low table between the 2 chairs. "I did not order dessert tonight," he said, though something in his voice suggested he was pleased regardless. "I know," I said, setting the plate down carefully in front of him. "This one is not for the menu. It is just for you." He studied the dessert for a long moment before lifting his fork, tasting it slowly, thoughtfully, the same careful attention he had given that very first tart weeks earlier. "Orange and dark chocolate," he said. "An interesting choice." "My aunt used to make something similar," I said, sitting down across from him. "For the 2 of us, on evenings when the bakery had been particularly hard that day. It always felt like something meant just for the people who needed it most, not something meant for a wider audience." Damien looked at me for a long moment, something quiet and genuine settling into his expression, the same look Ruth had once described as a man glad about a decision he had made. "Thank you for sharing it with me," he said, and I understood, sitting there in the quiet room with him, that he was not simply thanking me for the dessert. "For what it is worth," I said, "I do not think anyone has looked at me the way you did that first morning, not before and not since. Not like I was something to judge, but like I was someone worth understanding." "You are," Damien said simply, without any hesitation at all. "I saw it the moment you walked into my kitchen, long before I understood exactly what I was looking at." We sat together in comfortable silence after that, the tea slowly cooling between us, the dessert disappearing one careful bite at a time, and I found myself thinking back to that first terrible morning, the mockery, the sabotage, the 60 seconds that had changed everything for all of us in that kitchen. I had walked in that day, expecting to be underestimated one more time, in one more room, by one more set of people who judged the shape of me before they tasted a single bite of my work. Instead, I had found something I had never expected to find, in a house belonging to a man whose name people spoke so carefully, a place where my hands were finally trusted completely, and where the man across from me now looked at me, not as a curiosity or a mistake to be corrected, but as someone worth keeping close, for reasons that had grown to mean far more to both of us than pastry ever could.